Morning, good morning. Kevin, I think it's time for you to change your hat. Tigi Hazman. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning PESACHIM, Daf, Kuf, Yud, Dalid. We are in the middle of learning the instruction from Rabbi Zajac. We are up to his second statement. We are on Daf, Kuf, Yud, Gimel, Amud Beis. We're going to have, up until the Mishnah and Kuf, Yud, Dalid, some final words of advice. And today, Kuf, Yud, Dalid, we come back to the Seder. We're going to start elucidating the various stages of the Seder, beginning first with Kiddush. We're going to have a very important discussion, again, of Ein Mashgichen Babaskoil, the contradictions that we find regarding it. We're going to learn a very important Tosfos that clarifies when we do take heed to a Baskoil and when we do not. And then we're going to have in the following Mishnah, we're going to be moving on to Karpas. Now, aside of Karpas, we know that we dip the mother in Charoises. Charoises is a dip that's made from fruits that the Bnei Yisrael are compared to in Shir Hashirim, which are apples and pomegranates, figs, dates, walnuts, almonds. They are crushed and they are later kneaded together with wine. Importantly, minhag Chabad is not to lechatchila prepare the charoises kneaded with wine, because since we also will put the charoises in the sandwich that has in it matzah, and we are very careful not to have any type of gebrachs. So the Rabbeim, they used to have all of these fruits crushed, and before they would dip the marer in charoises, they would then add some wine, so that would have some wine in it. And guys, the wine has in it water. We're going to be learning about mitzvahs trichas kavana, machloikas, ultimately tanoim. We're going to review the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that oires, and let us understand oires as rice, is min daganhu. Wow, and according to him, if you allow it to become chametzik and a person consumes it on Pesach, they're chayiv kares. According to him, you can make matzahs out of oires because these two go together. A product that could become chametz, if made properly, could be used for the mitzvah of eating matzah. Any item that can never become chametz, they cannot be used for the fulfillment of the mitzvah of matzah. And we're going to be learning about the two cook dishes that are put on the ka'ara, right, as we will be learning. One is zecher lekorban Pesach, and one is zecher lechagigas Yudalad, and a lot more. So let us start where we left off on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. We are at the end of the medium size. We're in the last line of the medium size lines. We are 5 lines before the bottom of the Amud. Again, we are quoting that which Rabba Bar Barchana said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Marta, said in the name of Rav, said in the name of Rabbi Yossi Ish Hoitzel, Rabbi Yossi, the leader of Hoitzel. So up to his statement number 2. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'ar kol nivei dvarim. U'minayin. From where does one know that hayadeya b'chaveirei, that if someone knows regarding his colleague, regarding his friend, that the friend shehu gadol mimenu afilu b'davar echad, that even in only one area his chaver has something more than himself, shechayiv linoig b'kavod, that he has to honor him for that. Shenemar, and we're quoting a pasuk in Daniel. So we know that the Babylonians, when they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and they brought us into Galus Bavel, they right away appreciated the greatness of the Jewish people. And their goal was not to, God forbid, kill us. Actually, they conscribed us into their service. Daniel became the leading advisor of the king. Now, it wasn't that way. First, he had various advisors, including Daniel. But when it says that Kol Kovel di Ruach Yisei, that because there was some extra spirit of wisdom in Daniel, obviously noticed by Daryavesh, by the king. So because of that, so Umalka will read the bracket. So the king, Asis Lahakimoise Al Kol Malchusa. The king thought to appoint him over the entire kingdom. The king gave him additional kavod more than any other of the other ministers because he noticed that he has something that the others do not have. Now, Tosfos, we're going to jump quickly ahead on Daf Kuf Yudalo. The second Tosfos tells us, do not confuse what we are learning here to that which we learn in Pirkei Avos, that if someone teaches you something, you have to give them kavod. That's something else. I'm going to read the Tosfos inside. Tosfos Kuf Yudalo. Tzarech learning by kavod. That's what we are learning here. Is even b'shaloi limeid mimenu. Even if you didn't learn anything from your kavod, we have to honor a person that we know has something that we do not. The emes is everyone has something that we do not. Maybe that's his point. Why are we honoring him? Honoring meaning we're becoming somehow subservient because they're greater than us, because there's something that they have that we do not. And Tosfos quotes Pirkei Avos, that David HaMelech, right? Koroi alufoi, afal pi shelo loved elo shnei dvarim ha'achi toifel. Here, Rabbi Yossi is saying, not because you learned anything from him. Honor your fellow if he knows even one thing more than you, or if he has something more than you. And the final statement, right? 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Now, before the various stages of stringencies that we took upon ourselves, which leads us to observe Taras HaMishpacha the way we observe it today, biblically, after a woman gave birth to a boy, even though the first 7 days she was tamei, but she would go to the mikveh, then we don't apply this anymore. And from day 8 until day 40, even if she would see blood, even if blood would be flowing from her womb, it does not make her impure. And we call that dam toihar. Similarly, after a woman gives birth to a girl, so for the first 14 days, she's tamei. This is psukim in the Chumash. But from day 15 until day 80, including day 80, dam toihar, we don't practice this today. And then going into the night of the 41st, going into the night of the 81st, she would go back to the normal rules that if she would see dam, she would become a nida. So he was the one that said, already starting to be machmer, that hayesheves al dam tahoid asura l'shamish, as the Rashbam explains, that when you go into the time, which is after a boy, when you enter the 41st day, the night going into the 41, after a girl, the night going into the 81, even if a woman did not see blood, he says, be machmer and abstain from having relations, make believe as if she became a nida. Why? Because since for many days she's accustomed to seeing blood and not becoming tameya. True, by a girl, double than by a boy, but nevertheless, 33 days, 66 days, after a woman leaves a period of time where she knows that she can see dam, and she's anyways tahoira, if you will right away jump into, if she doesn't see dam, she still remains tahoira, she might see dam, and she'll think, she's tahoira. So in order to make it clear, no, now a new phase is beginning. So he made a chumrah, even if she did not see dam, a couple should not be together. This is very similar to the periods in the month, to the times in the month where a couple is not together, even though the woman is not a nidam, whether it is Vesta Chodesh, right? Whether it is Oynas Haflaga, because for other reasons. So this is a concept. He was machmer. Now, how much time should a couple not be together, even though she did not see blood, even though she's not a nida? So at kama amarav, guys, we married people are familiar with these words. Oyna, literally, oyna means a period of time. How much time is that? So, Chavra, here we have in the Rashbam, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amir, Machloikis between Rashi and the Rashbam. First, he quotes Oyna, Yoim Valayla. And by the way, it's not in that order. Really, it means the night and then the day. And the Rashbam says, Kach Perush Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu of the Rashbam, was his Zayda, but it was his teacher, the Rashi. However, V'loy Nehira, and he says an Oyna means only a 12-hour period. And being that we're speaking about the one closest to Dam Tayeb, it's the night going into 41, the night of 81. In the morning, they're good. This is very similar for people who remember when we learned this properly, that even though we paskin that all of the oynas that we mentioned, the haflaga, the chodesh, these two are 12 hours, but the Oyer Zerua says that every oyna should be like the oyna beininus. That's called the oynas Oyer Zerua. Very similar. So here you have, according to Rashi, the oina of Rabbi Yossi ben Hoitzel is also 24 hours, and Rashbam is more lenient with 12 hours. Okay, so now that we quoted 3 statements from this great Jew, now the Gemara says something interesting, that the Tanach we learned, that there are many people that are the same, but for some reason they were sometimes given different names. Hu Yosef Ish Hoitzel. And that's the same one that sometimes is called Yosef Habavli. Two lines before the bottom of the Amid. Hu Isi ben Gur Aryeh. It's amazing. Yosef and Isi. And Hu Isi ben Yehuda. Hu Isi ben Gamliel. Hu Isi ben Mahalalel. But what was his real name? Isi ben Akavio. And the Halachis Ketanos writes that this is Pashat connected to Golus, that he was teaching Torah and the Romans were out to get him. So he changed his name so they shouldn't chop him. What do we have by us in the recent history? Avram Mayor, right? Avram Drizin, Ab Hamoin Chasidim. Mamish, there are stories that we have that he was called Avram Mayor. His name was Avram Drizin. On the documents that they came to chop Avram, they asked him, did you see Avram Drizin? They asked him. He said, no. They asked other people, who is that? No, that's Avram Mayor. Pashat, he changed names. He should not be caught. Says the Gemara Vayta. Similarly, the last line of the Amid, Hu Yitzchak ben Tavla, Hu Yitzchak ben Chakla, Hu Yitzchak ben Ilah. Also, the Bach takes out the last two, that there were certain people that are the same, but for some reason, their names kept on changing. Daf Kuf Yudalet. Now, the word different Rabbi Yitzchak, it's not that it's all the same Rabbi Yitzchak. So the Gemara gives an interesting klal. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Achad de Shmaitzel, which means that whenever we learn in the Gemara Rabbi Yitzchak, it doesn't say which Rabbi Yitzchak and the word different Rabbi Yitzchaks, other than the ones that we just mentioned that were the same. So if it's in the context of a Shemaitza, means a halachic ruling. So you should know it's Yitzchak ben Acha. Even if it doesn't say ben Acha, it's him. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas is the Agadata. Whenever we are learning Agadata and we quote, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, that is Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas. And this simanech, and it's that important to remember. So either we have in the parentheses Shimuna Achai Vereyai, or we have on the side Shimauni Achai Va'ami. So Shimauni sounds like Shemaitza, and Achai, like listen to me, my brother, my friend. It's a Gavaldik and Amanik. So whenever we are learning and a Shemaitza, Shimauni. So who is it? Which Rabbi Yitzchak is it? It's the one, it's Ben Acha. And automatically we'll remember that the Agadata is Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas. Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi. Final, very important piece of advice. That a choil batzel, the shave bitzel. Eat an onion and sit in the shade. What does it mean, amongst many other things, that if a person is careful and they don't splurge all their money buying steak in fancy steakhouses, if all they eat are onions, which is very nutritious, but it's not that geschmack, they will never lose their home. Their financial security won't be in jeopardy because they ate it all up, and they can comfortably sit in the shade of their house. That's one of the interpretations. But don't eat Grace Fenster foods, geese, and then Nebuch, the chickens was a big yichus. Today, chickens, they're giving yeshiva for shays from kaparas the whole year. Don't eat foods that was considered very expensive. And then what's going to happen? You will constantly have an appetite for it. It's like we learned about being addicted to. You'll need expensive food. And what's going to happen? You won't buy a home. You'll have to mortgage your home. And they said, Pachus me mechalach or me mishtoyich. Right, reduce the expenditures for foods, not God forbid to reduce the healthy foods, to reduce foods that are luxurious in order to make sure that you can use your savings for your home. And similarly, when Ula came from Eretz Yisrael, Ula traveled the whole time, Eretz Yisrael bubble. So when he came to bubble from Eretz Yisrael, he said that masla masilin b'marava. There's a mashal in Maidav, or there's a saying in Maidav, means in the West and Eretz Yisrael, similar, that the akil Aliyah is the fatty tail. Again, it's a very expensive food. It's like a very geschmack, but it's expensive. What's going to happen? You'll have to hide in your roof. Tashay ba'aliyasa. This is a play of words. Why will you have to hide in your roof? Because you will owe people money. Why can't you pay them back? Because you ate too much fatty food. So you'll eat fancy food, but you'll have to hide. But the achel kalkule, if you eat vegetables, and this is really perhaps a lead up to the next whole sugya, not the next Mishnah, but the following Mishnah about the vegetables that we eat on Pesach. And Dafka, one of the reasons is because that's what Avodim ate, simple, basic foods. If you eat vegetables, that's again plain words kalkule. So then, akil kolei the masa shachid, you'll be able to lie near the city dump, which means you'll be able to hang out in a place visible to all. You won't be afraid not to be seen by creditors. Okay, so live more modesty and spend on a home. If they would know how much a home costs here in Los Angeles, Chevre, I don't care how many steaks you don't eat, Ribono Shel Olam. But no, then if you didn't eat a few stickings, then you can buy a house. What happened to that world? Okay, says the Mishnah. Chevre, we're going through the Seder we're going through the order of the Seder. Let's also remember, we had this not that long ago, that when they would have small tables, not the way Tosfos says, since the tables are big, we don't schlep tables nowadays, and we follow that. They would actually, by Kiddush, there was nothing else in the room. First, you made Kiddush, and then they brought the table in. So let's begin. Mazgu loy kois rishon. Mazgu loy kois rishon, mizigas hakois literally means to dilute, because the wines were very syrupy, they were very concentrated, and there were different techniques. The normal was 3-to-1. Okay, 3/4, it's a ratio of 4-to-1, 3/4 water, 1/4 of wine. And loy, they would dilute for him. Some people have a minig that on the night of the Seder, others pour a cup for them. That comes from here. Mazgu loy. Someone will dilute the wine, prepare the wine. And what happens? So, we had mamish this machloikes and brachas. That the Seder of Kiddush is first. You make the bracha on the day, which means you make Kiddush, and then you make the bracha on the wine. Boy, the priyagofen. And we paskin like Beis Hillel when we paskin like Beis Hillel. No, first we make the bracha on the wine, which is exactly how we do it. Don't confuse the Yom HaShishi Shabbos. We were speaking about Kiddush and Birchas Hanahenen. The bracha on the wine. First, you make the Borei Priyagofen, and then you make Mevarech al Hayoim, which is the Yom Tov of Pesach. Says the Gemara Tana Rabbanan that the Varim Shebein Beishamai LeBeis Hillel Besuda. Right, the following amongst the various machloikesin that is meal related between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is the one that we just learned. Beis Shammai Oimrim, the school of Shammai says that Mevarech al Hayoim. First, you make the bracha of Kiddush. And then you make the bracha on the wine. And Beis Shammai gave 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is Mepnei Shahayoim Goyrem Liyayin Shiyavoy. In other words, the Rashbam teaches that we have wine before we have the meal. We have wine before we have the meal. And why do we have wine before we have the meal? Every time you have wine, you have it during the meal. Why are you having it before you? Because you're making Kiddush. So since Kiddush is the reason for you to have wine now, so make Kiddush first, which will explain what happens before you're washing. Are you having wine? Reason number 2, ukvar Kiddush hayoim v'adayin yayin lo ba. When it gets dark, it's already Yom Tov. Even if you were not makabel anything early by Shabbos. No, it's dark, it's Yom Tov. So the chiyuv, the kedusha came before. Of course, we are merkadosh b'dvarim, even Shabbos that merkadosh v'kaima, but still there's a kedushas hayoim, there's isur malacha from when the day came. The wine is being brought now. So therefore, kiddush before wine. Those are 2 reasons. Beis Hillel oimrim, mevarach al hayayin v'achar כך mevarach al hayoim. Why? If you lack wine, truth be told, we have this here in Avri Pesachim. If you lack wine, make Kiddush on bread. But if you lack wine and bread, you cannot make Kiddush. Yet you speak about the Kiddush of Shabbos and Shemona Esrei. True. But you would not make Kiddush now. So since the wine is allowing you to make Kiddush, so say wine first. Davar Achad, and another reason, because of a very general rule. When you have 2 things to be done, both are important. So the one that's more frequent takes precedence. No, so he says birchas hayayin tadira, because every time you have wine, you have to make a bracha of wine. Or birchas hayayin, which is only unique days, Yom Tov, or Pesach, or Shabbos, it's not as frequent. And there's the klal Says the Baraisa after quoting Beis Shammai and his reasons and Beis Hillel and their reasons, the hilchas kedivrei Beis Hillel. And asks the Gemara, first of all, the reason that Beis Hillel gave, Shahayayin goyrem lekiddush et yamar, If you lack wine, you can't make Kiddush. That's such a great reason. So my davar acher, why did Beis Hillel have to give a second reason? And v'chi tema. So the answer is because, yeah, you heard a reason. But Beis Shammai, they gave two reasons. So one would have countered Hassan, there, meaning Beis Shammai tarte. You're only giving one. So Beis Hillel says, we have another one. Hachinami tartenino. And the second one again is tada v'sheina tada koidem. Gemara quotes further. It says in the Braisa that the halacha follows kedivrei Beis Hillel. Asks the Gemara Pshita. Chavre Erevin Yud Gimel. If you remember, for years Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were arguing, and no one knew how to determine. And after 3 years, right, a Baskol came out. I don't remember. It was 3 years. After a while, a Baskol came out, and he says, "Elo ve'elo divrei Elokim chayim." But v'halacha kedivrei Beis Hillel. So we already know that. The Hanafik Baskoil. So the Gemara gives two answers. Iboy Yisema, that this Braisa was taught before the Baskoil. And Iboy Yisema, the Braisa was taught after the Baskoil. However, our Braisa follows the Shita of Rabbi Yoshua. Tanur Shalachnoi, when we had the Rabbi Eliezer arguing with all of the Chachamim, and remember that whole story, and if I'm right, may this miracle happen, may that miracle happen, and may a Baskol came out, and a Baskol says that the Rabbi Eliezer is right, and the Chevra and the Beis Medrash were not impressed by the Baskol. But Rabbi Shua says, Ein Mashgichin b'Baskol. So what that we have in Eruvin that the Baskol said Allah Kedivre Beis Hillel? You have to have the Chachamim down here, Yidin, the Neshamot, Begufim, have to paskin like whom is the halach. Look inside the third Tosfos. This is a very important Tosfos. Right? That we follow Rabbi Yeshua the Amar Ein Mashgichin b'Baskol. So he asks, V'im Toimar, Maishna the Kaimelon, Kebaskol, the Beis Hillel, the like Kaimelon, Kebaskol the Rabbi Eliezer. So Oy Bazoi, let's take understand. If we don't listen to the Baskol, the bottom line is that we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer in the Tanur Shalachnoi case. We paskin like Beis Hillel. So you're telling me that Ein Mashgichin b'Baskol, but the bottom line is we are following Beis Hillel. So why don't we follow Rabbi Eliezer? Or in other words, do we say that this concept that we don't take into account a heavenly voice that's ruling like someone, do we completely reject it? Is that Shittas Rabbi Yeshua? Do we know that there's a Shaila and Shuva Sefer called Shailas and Shuvas Min HaShamayim from Rishon that everyone accepts? That there's certain ways of getting answers, whether it's Ashbas Halkumas, just coming off mystical Gemaras, they would put under their pillow a parchment, and they would say something before they would go to sleep, and they would wake up, and there would be letters written on the parchment. And it would be Rashi Tevisin, and with Ruach HaKodesh, they would know what it means. Mamash like the Urim V'Tumim, and there's a sefer printed from it. And it's accepted. So Tosfos says, even Rabbi Yeshua that says, Ein Mashgichin b'Baskoil, it's not an absolute rule. Look into this Tosfos. V'yesh Shleiman. Dahache Beis Hillel Havaruba. There is a reason why we should follow Beis Hillel. Why? Because the Torah says we follow the majority. On the other hand, there is a problem. There's a thorn. What's the thorn? That Beis Shammai were machadadei, they were sharper. So since we have already a reason to rely on Beis Hillel, we use the Baskoil, even according to Rabbi Yeshua, we're going to follow Beis Hillel nonetheless. Beis Shammai, they appear to be sharper. No, we follow the Roiv, and Baskoil confirmed it. Over there in the story of Tanur Shalachnoi, right over there, the Baskoil hoye keneged Rabbim. Fakert, Rabbi Eliezer was das Yachid. The Baskoil was going against the Rabbim. If following the rules that we have tell us not to listen to Rabbi Eliezer, there is where we don't follow the Baskoil. That's a great concept. So therefore, for example, when it's not a Rabbim, but we don't know the halacha, then maybe you could follow a Baskoil. That concept, that approach is based on this Tosfos over here. Okay, Chevra, Mishnah, the Kuf Yedalad on the base and bottom of the Amud. After Kiddush was made, then a table was brought in. Now, normally, what would be brought in during the year? The challah and the meal. Oh, we're not up to the challah and the meal. We're going to follow the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Rashbam, that the first thing they brought in to the exclusion of all else was only karpas. Okay, I know that Kaddish Urchatz, but the Urchatz is for the karpas. The table was brought in with now karpas could be any vegetable. It's important to remember that, including the vegetables that we had in this Masechta that are good for marar. Marar is exclusive. Ideally, it's chasa. Ideally, it's chazeres. Ideally, it's lettuce. If you don't have any other vegetable other than chazeres, could you use it for karpas? And if you used it for karpas, then what's going to be the halacha regarding, will you eat it again? When it comes to marar, why would you eat it again? Because it says in Parshas Baloischa, the pasuk is 9:11, Perek 9, pasuk Yud Aleph, that al matzois umeroidim yechlu, matzah and then marar. So if you ate it for karpas, but you ate a vegetable. So is the seder ma'akev, not ma'akev? Even if you have to eat it again, another question, and that will be, what bracha do you make on karpas? Now, our minig now is we make a boire priyadama, not a minig, you have to make a boire priyadama. We have in mind the marar, and when we have the marar later, we don't have to make a boire priyadama because the birchas hanehen we already covered. We have to make ashek deshanim v'mitzvos al achilas marar. The question now will be, if the only vegetable you have available for the karpas is a vegetable that is good for marar, when would you make the bracha al achilas marar? That's the whole daf today, and that really will have to do with whether mitzvah is tzrichas kavana or ain't tzrichas kavana. What's if mitzvah is tzrichas kavana al pi nigla, not al pi chasidus, that you have to intend while you're doing a mitzvah that you are doing it for the mitzvah. That's mitzvah tzrichas kavana in nigla. In chasidus, kavana means avan yira. Just to make that clear, do you have to feel the love of God? Here we're speaking about what is your intention. Now, if I'm eating karpas, and I'm only having karpas we'll learn, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children, we have another vegetable. That's the reason. I'm having it only for karpas. I'm not b'chlal thinking about marar. If mitzvah's tzricha is kavana, then of course I'm not going to make a al achilas marar. Of course I have to eat marar again because what I ate was karpas. But if mitzvahs don't need to have kavana, it means if I do what God wanted, or what the Chazal told me, which is what God wants me to do, to follow what they're saying, or I follow a minute, even if I wasn't mindful of what I'm doing, I fulfilled the mitzvah, you chap the beauty here, then l'cho'era, when I ate the karpas, even though I was not mechavein for marar, that's the mitzvah of marar. That's the whole daf. Let's begin with the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Viu lefanav, again, they would bring the table. And according to the Rashbam, now only the karpas. So the Mishnah is being mechadesh, metabel, you can dip the karpas, we dip it into salt water. Even the Rashbam says, chazeres. Chazeres is one of the items that are good for marar. In other words, that if you don't have a different type of vegetable, our meaning is to have an onion, or people have a potato. It's not negeya. You can use chazeres. And even though you are using chazeres for the karpas, you're using lettuce. Let's call this romaine lettuce. You dip that in ad shemagia leparperas hapas. Parperas hapas means that which is secondary to the bread. That which is secondary to the bread here is referring to marar, says the Rashbam. In other words, even if you are using chazeres for karpas, you're not covered with marar. You have it now, until you have it again. Let's read it inside. Look inside the second widest lines under the Tosfos. Which on the second one is where shehu mevarech al achilas marar. And as it says, we just quoted the pasuk in Ba'aloischa al matzos and then umroidim, meaning batchila matzah v'achakach marar. The tibul rishoin, the first eating of a vegetable, the word tibul means to dip it. Just to be aware that then almost all foods were dipped into something else. I'm not negating the fact that our minig taka is to be metabel the karpas in Salzwasser. Okay, but coming back over here,
why are we using the lashon parperes hapas? What exactly does that mean?
Parperes means something that's secondary. Parperes hapas is to emphasize tzemach, is that a meal is bread, and everything else that's eaten with the meal, even if it's a mitzvah gives it chashivus. It's a mitzvah to have marar. I know now it's only rabbinic because we don't have the korban. But so what? Even bezman habayis, we're going to call the marar parperes hapas. That's the way that works. It's a big machlokes.
What are we referring to when we say Paperes Pas? What's coming next?
No, the Chiddush Tzemach is that even though the only thing you have for karpas is the same type of vegetable that is good for mother. Now, mother is only good. We had 5 types we had in the Mishnah. Karpas can be any vegetable. Mishnah is saying not that you should use the same. That's the way we'll learn. You don't have the hasnish. All you have is romaine lettuce. So use it for karpas and don't think that you were yoitzer. Have it now until you're going to have it again. Now, why you having it now? The second.
But the pas is referring to the matzah because you eat the murder after the matzah.
I know that. I know. But we're making it clear that even the murder that's a mitzvah is still called secondary to the matzah because it's eaten in a meal, and everything eaten in the meal is secondary to the bread. The tibul rishon zeh, that's the Rashbam, is kedei sheyakir tinik. Yakir means, he should notice what's going on over here. He never saw such a thing. And he should ask, before, oy gewalt, almost every chasana you go to, what do they serve? You know, the lettuce that they took out 14 days ago, and it's like on the plate over there, and then they put up some tomato on top. I don't know what they do today. So that's something new. Then you never saw that. Meal means bread, vegetables, it was unheard of. And that was to arouse curiosity. And then the minhag remained. Or people extend Pesach for the whole year. Maybe that's what it is. We don't say Chasal Siddur Pesach. The ganze Yar Pesach is that we have vegetables before the meal, back inside the Mishnah. Now, next step, now according to the Rashbam, it's after you finish Magid. Tosfos argues, we're going to learn the Rashbam. Then, Heviu Lefanav Nacha table. And on that table, guys, it's amazing, right? This is Mamish de Ka'ara now. They brought it, you had Kiddush, that's it. Then karpas, that's it. Then they bring Heviu Lefanav matzah and chazeres. Chazeres is for the mother. Vacharoises, we're also trying to point out that the charoises is used dafke for the mother. The charoises is not used for the karpas, even though we are metabel in salt water. Good, comes later. And the shnei tafshilin. That's so beautiful. To learn the source, like we have, the first thing we do is the zroy in the beitza, which is the shnei tafshilin, a big part of today's daf at the end. The shnei tafshilin is we bring 2 cooked dishes. Cooked doesn't mean dafka cook. Cook also includes roasted. We're going to learn, I think, a tosfos. We'll learn a tosfos today that says dafka, that which is reminding us of the Koren Pesach should be roasted. Because the Koren Pesach, which is our minhag, we roast. But the Mishnah calls it 2 cooked dishes. So it's amazing. The last ones mentioned in the Mishnah are the first 2 that we put. Then he says, Afal pi, you bring the charoises, even though there is no mitzvah in the charoises. Upa, Rabbi Lazar says, or Rabbi Lazar ben Tzadik says, yes, it is a mitzvah. Guys, we'll leave this machloikas whether charoises is a mitzvah or it's not a mitzvah. If it's not a mitzvah, for the Gemara. That's going to be next, not today. And the last line, the same time that in Golus we would bring the matzah and the chazeres and the charoises and the shnei tafshilin, uba migdash hoymifim lefanav. At this time, the gufay shel Pesach, the body, the physical Koren Pesach. Okay, so the main part of the Mishnah isn't only the seder. According to the Rashbam, is that they did not bring it out all at the same time. Mamish, not the way we do it today. Now, guys, just to appreciate, you have different Rishonim learning the Mishnah differently, and with the halacha doesn't follow the way we're learning it. Kiddush only, karpas only, and then they would bring everything else out. But the nakud of the Mishnah is that even when a yid is using for karpas chazeres, or called in the Gemara chasa, they will have to have it again after the matzah. Daf, kuf, yud, dalid, amid beis, right? Starting the Gemara on top of the amid. Karpas is brought according to the everyone by Kiddush. Nothing was on the table, and by the way, Kiddush there wasn't even bread on the table. Okay, we said the whole Amud Baal Peh Mamash. So Amar Ish Lakish, Nachamol, you're having Karpas twice, even though it's not Karpas. You're having the vegetable twice. So Yisrael from our Mishnah, you prove that mitzvah is tzricha kavana. That in order for you to fulfill a mitzvah, while you're doing it, you have to intend to do what you're doing because God commanded me to do what I'm doing. And since kiven the loy beidon chiyuva the marar hu the acherle, since I ate the vegetable which is good for karpas and good for marar, but I ate it not at the time that I was obligated to eat marar, as we mentioned, al matzois umeroidim, on that order. And therefore, beboire priha adama, that's the Rashi Tevisin, hu da achalei, I'm only eating it to eat a hadama, like we quoted the Rashbam that quotes the Gemara, to have a vegetable before you begin everything in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. And therefore, vidilma, vidilma lo ichav l'marar, maybe you didn't have in mind now when you ate the karpas from what it says, Toisvis, this dilma's lav dafke. Resh Lakish is saying more than that. Resh Lakish is saying, vidilma means that maybe, sometimes you will speak that way. You did not have in mind mother. You had in mind karpas. So therefore, based on the rule that mitzvahs need kavana, so you did not fulfill your obligation. Since you did not fulfill the obligation, therefore, you have to dip it in. And we talk about here, by the way, we dip it into the charoises. We dip it in l'shem marad after you eat the matzah. He's very articulate, and he goes further. He speaks out the other side, because the isal kadaitach. If one would have thought that mitzvahs don't need kavana, then the question would be, lama loch treiti bule. Why are you eating the same thing twice? You already fulfilled your obligation. Now, the guy, this is very important. This proof is on many premises, but most importantly on the premise that the seder of marar is not essential. In other words, if marar has to come after matzah, so like if I put on tefillin at night, let's go midoraisa, we paskin, it's okay. If a person puts on tefillin when they should not, they did nothing. If I count the omer today, if it's not the zman, I don't care that it's mitzvah tzrichas kavanah or not tzrichas kavanah. There is no mitzvah yet. So it's based on the premise that you could have muttered before the matzah. So it is the time of the mitzvah. It's the night of the seder. It's only because, says Reish Lakish, that mitzvah tzrichas kavanah that we can explain the rule in the Mishnah. So says Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish will be refuted. Refuted means not that his rule of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah is refuted. It's really a machlokes tanoim, but his proof is not a proof. Says the Gemara Mimai, I reject your Reish Lakish is your raya because I can counter argue Dilma loyla mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavanah. You asked Udeka Amart Trei Tibul Lamali. I'll tell you why. Amazing. In other words, even though, like Rashbam says, that having vegetables before the meal is not that common, but what's even more uncommon is to have vegetables twice. So a child sees an adult eating a vegetable, okay, he wanted a vegetable. But when he's going to have it again, he's going to become more curious. Why are you having it again? And this concept of provoking the curiosity to make the meal distinguished of any other type of meal will justify having it again, even though you fulfilled the mitzvah. The Gemara is not saying that mitzvahs don't need kavanah. We're just explaining that the Mishnah doesn't have to be based on mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. And furthermore, and if you're going to ask that the only reason why we have the dippings twice, the second dipping is to arouse the curiosity of the children. So maybe Lashme'in and Shari Rakais, why did the Mishnah have to begin telling you that you used chazeres for karpas? If the main thing is to tell you have vegetables twice, then the Mishnah should have spoken about a normal case. Have any vegetable for a karpas, any vegetable is good. Why did the Mishnah begin with chazeres? So the Gemara explains why. Because maybe mitzvahs don't need kavanah. The reason why we gave an example in the Mishnah of a person using chazeres or chasa, something which is good for mother, having that for karpas, because the iyashmein and shari yirakais, one might have thought that heicha the ika shari yirakais only then hu de bein and trei tibule. Yeah, you're right, to arouse the curiosity of children. But abel chazeres luchuda. But if a person only has access to this type of lettuce, which is good for mother as well as it is for karpas, then maybe one would have thought loy boy trei tibule. And why is that? Because mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. Because even whether you had in mind mother or not, you already fulfilled the obligation. You already fulfilled the obligation. Gewaldig. And you don't have to do it ala seder. So the Mishnah, to make it clear, Chumash Mulan, that even, look at the Gemara's counter to Reish Lakish, the Mishnah is actually telling you that if you used romaine lettuce for karpas, you fulfilled mother. Adarabah. And still, even though you fulfill the mitzvah, do it again. Only for the children to become curious. Komash Malan, that afilu chazeres. And let's go the opposite. That mitzvahs ain't srichas kavana. So when you ate the karpas, and you did the mitzvah of mother, and the almatzah sumaroidim doesn't have to be al the seder. Nevertheless, so that's a counter to the Shlakish. You could explain the Mishnah even if you would hold that mitzvah is ein tzrichas kavana. Now, the Mishnah never mentioned anything of when you make the bracha, which will be essential. The Gemara will speak about it. Because if this taka would be the way to learn the Mishnah, then the din would be that if you only have chazeres, if you only have romaine lettuce, or if you only have a vegetable that's good for mother, then you would have to make 2 brachas by the karpas and have it again later. And that's going to be a machlokes here between Amoraim. Let's go right. So first of all, Reish Lakish, you can't prove it from the Mishnah. Now I have a problem with you because I'm going to quote another brisa, and that brisa clearly holds that mitzvahs don't need kavanah. For oi, Tanya, we learned in a brisa regarding mother that achol on demai, that if the only vegetable you have is from vegetables that rabbinically have to be partially tithed, demai, and one would have argued, and if you did not tithe it, so let's call this, let's say, a mitzvah haba b'aveda. Says the Braisa, no, you were yoitza. How could you fulfill a mitzvah with something that's even only on a rabbinic level, not kosher? So the Rashbam reminds us when it comes to Demai, since it's only a rabbinic obligation, from the times, sometimes earlier on in the Zman by Yesheni, to tithe or to partially tithe produce that you bought from someone who's not yet knowledgeable in the laws of tithing and of Tara, from Am Haaretz, that if a person, God forbid, is impoverished, they are not obligated to separate Demai. They can rely on the majority of Amaratzim that did separate all of Trumas or Maisvus. And everyone potentially can become impoverished. Buy a house, chas v'shalom, I'm kidding. Yeah, you can become impoverished by being mafkir all your nachas. Right, that we keep on having that. So since everyone can very easily, we know that very easily, or the few dollars that you have can go out of the window. So for here, it's good enough. You can fulfill.
Also, if you make a wedding, it could make you poor very quickly.
If you make a wedding, you become wealthy because you have another child. You know how much you get another child. You know how much money you spend for your children here? You get bechinam almost.
So you put them to work? Is that what you're saying?
You put them to work. All right. Yes. Number 2. Now here's the chara. The Braisa says clearly, if someone ate marar and while he was eating it, he was not thinking about the mitzvah. He had no intent to fulfill the mitzvah. Yatsa. That's the kasha. In other words, we see from a Tana that mitzvahs do not need kavanah. Next, just to finish the Braisa. If you ate the marar piecemeal means you didn't eat it in one eating, but you ate like a half a kazayis, and then you ate another half a kazayis. So the rule will be like any other eatings, that as long as you ate it within teich achilas pras, even though you took a break, if achilas pras, let's say, is 9 minutes, and it takes you to eat a half a kazayis 20 seconds, that's a big break. As long as it is teich kadei achilas pras, the Gemara says yatsa. Ubalat shelo yisha ben achila lachaverta yoiser mechdei achilas pras. And the detail, the Magen Avram, or it tells us, we pass like the Magen Avram, that it's not that in between. If achilas paras is 9 minutes, it's not 9 minutes in between. It's from the beginning of the first eating until the end of the second eating has to be within that time frame. Bottom line is, we see from a Tana that mitzvahs do not need kavanah, answers the Gemara. Okay, it doesn't bother us that the Mishnah is not a proof. According to the Shlakish, it is. But the Braisa is a problem. Tanoyehi. It's a machlokes tanoim where the mitzvahs need kavanah. The Tanya, Rabbi Yosi Yoimer. And the beautiful that the machlokes is talking regarding Maroir, Afal Pi Shetibel Bechazeres. Explicitly. He didn't have the onion. Right? We didn't discover potatoes yet. This Yid, the only vegetable he had was chazeres, was lettuce, which is what we use for mother. That's all you had. And you use that for karpas, that's the pshat on Rabbi Yosi, Afal Pi Shetibel. B'chazeres, mitzvah, lahavi lefan of chazeres, there's an obligation, that's how we teach, there's an obligation to bring in front of the Yid chazeres. That's because Rabbi Yosi holds, mitzvahs need kavanah. and vacharoises, and ushnei tafshilin. And by the way, mitzvah, just to make it clear, bizman habayis, then the mitzvah midiraisa, right? Matzah is independent of Pesach, and Marar biblically is only when we have the Koren Pesach. But when we don't have the Koren Pesach, then we're chayv midrabanan. So Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvah strichas kavanah. So Reish Lakish follows Rabbi Yossi. Frag the Gemara vakate mimai. Maybe there's no Rabbi Yossi, because maybe Rabbi Yossi also holds mitzvahs ein strichas kavanah. The reason why you have to have Marar again is like we are saying, that the heavy says the Gemara, no, the word mitzvah would not have been used. My mitzvah. Since he uses the word mitzvah, Adarabba, clear, Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvahs, srichas, kavana. It's good to know that this is a very important sugya, that even though we paskin as a rule, generally, mitzvahs don't need kavana, there are certain mitzvahs that if kavana is part of the mitzvah, if you don't have kavana, then you don't have the mitzvah. Even if the mitzvah is done, for example, praying, tefillah, so we have to articulate the words. But if there was no kavana while you were articulating the words, as we learned in brachos, even though we paskin normally, mitzvahs don't need kavana, there the tefillah is not a tefillah. Theoretically, you have to repeat the tefillah. But we learned the Tais was the only reason why we don't repeat the Shemona Esrei again is because who says you can have kavanah the second time? You'll say God's name in vain again. But for example, the Shema, if a person, while they said the Shema, they were not being machav and al pinigla, they were not mindful of the words that they were saying, then they have to repeat the Shema. Okay. Now, my shnei tafshilin that we had in our Mishnah, that is brought. So Amar Afuna. So how different do they need to be, or how chashuv do they need to be? The two cooked items is brought. Achas zecher lePesach, and the other is zecher lechagiga. And we already are familiar. No, we're not referring to the chagiga that was brought in every Yom Tov. We're speaking about the unique chagiga that's brought on the 14th to make sure that you eat the Pesach al hasoiva chagiga shudalid. And don't forget that there was a machlokes tanoi whether that has to be prepared like the Koren Pesach. Does it have to be roasted or could it be cooked? I want to just jump to the end. What is our minig? It's amazing. We use the zroya that we roast, and then the egg that we cook. We're going to learn the Tosfos soon inside. That is based on those who hold that the Chagiga Shudalid is not bound by the rules of the Pesach. So one carbon can be cooked, one carbon has to be roasted. So the two items, one for this, one for that. Now we also bring two very different items. But let's look inside the Gemara, how it all began. Rafuna says, Silka va'aroiza, cooked beets and rice. Cooked beets and rice, Rashbam says, you know what he's trying to tell you in between the lines? You don't have to bring meat. Of course, two types of meat is better. But even if you don't have meat, that's the pshat. You have beets, you have aroiza, oichid good. Rava, have a mahadar asilke aroiza. Rava was a Talmud of Rafuna. Rafuna wasn't saying that this is better than meat. But since the Rebbe said that you can use beets and rice, he dafke looked for beets and rice, even though Rava was able to afford the meat. He would have gotten the meat. Why? Because of the klal, hoil v'nafik mipuma de Rafuna. His kashrus, if your Rebbe said something, follow what the Rebbe said. He was not. His intent was not to advocate dafka these two items. Let's go mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. It's not about the kavana. The Rebbe said silka v'aroiza. It's going to be. Amar Ravashi says Ravashi. Shmamino. What's the bach? Midir Rav Huna. That what delays the chayish lahad Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. He does not subscribe to the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that we had above the Tanya Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Yomer. That oiris, let's touch oiris rice, is a type of grain. L'chumra ulakula. On one hand, that you're chayiv biblical karetz, God forbid, if it becomes chametz. And because of this being an item according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that is shaykh to the world of chametz. So if you take care, and you don't allow it to rise, then you can actually make matzah out of it, rice cakes. And obviously, he would not tell us shnei tafshilin to use an item that can become chametz, because we completely reject that opinion. The reason why Ashkenazim don't have rice, that's because it's a minig, because of kitnias. Okay, right. Chizkiya Amar, more about the two dishes. He goes even a greater novelty. Afilu dag u beitza, as the Rishonim teach, if a person cooks fish together with an egg, Beitza Sha'alav. So it's not two separate cooked dishes. It's one that has two parts. Das is two tafshilin. It's good enough. Rabbi Yosef says, no, the other extreme. Tzarech shnei mine basar. Not only has to be two, and has to be meat. And one should be Zeichel LaPesach, and one should be Zeichel LaChagiga. Let's take a break here, look inside Tosfos. The third Tosfos under the Gemara, Shnei Minei Basar, Perush Rabbeinu Hanano, that how do you prepare it? Sli Zeichel LaPesach. The one that's Zeichel LaPesach, which we call the Zraya, which we put on the top of the car on the right side, that dafka should be roasted. Now, our minig is also to take all the meat off, and it should be so roasted, burnt, that you should not be able to eat it. It shouldn't even look like you're having anything, kacham achutz, but it's roasted because it's Zeichel LaPesach. Umevushel, and the cooked one is Zeichel LaChagiga, which is, we follow the Rabbeinu Hanana, but we're learning Tosfos. Tosfos says, I reject that. It's not enlightened for me, because the Kaimelon, we pass like Ben Tema that we learned above. The Ein Chagigas Nachelas El Tzli. We pass like Ben Tema, and they both have to be eaten Tzli, V'chulei. So how can you have one cooked? Okay, back inside the Gemara. Ravina Amar Afilu Garmo Bishula. He says like this: when you have a bone and you cook bones, that's the way they made a broth. That's called tu tafshilin. It's similar but different than the dug and the beitza. No, it's not two separate things. Now, the upside is it's meat. Yechap, but the bone and the broth is called tu tafshilin. Okay. And now let's conclude with the machlekes that we mentioned above. So pshita means it's clear and there's no debate that heicha de ika sha'ari yirakos, that when you have any other types of vegetables that are all good for karpas, but vegetables that are not good for mother, then that is what you should use for karpas. Then it's pshita that mevarech hasha'ar yiraka is boide pri adama, karpas. And again, like we mentioned, you have in mind when you make the bracha on the karpas that you will also be eating after magid, after the matzah, you're going to be eating mother. And we don't repeat the boide pri adama again, with all of the details that we don't eat a shiur, because if you eat a shiur, then you have to make a bracha achreina, then you have to make an bracha rishayna v'chulei, and v'achil, and then v'hadam mevarach al achilas marer v'achil. That's pshita. Why? Like we have been learning, because then we are not entering the debate whether mitzvah is tzrichas kavana or not. You ate a vegetable for karpas that's b'chlal not good for marer, so you have to eat marer again. And when you eat marer, you make the bracha shekadishanu mitzvah sevitzivanu al achilas marer. This is the first time you're fulfilling the mitzvah. Question is, and here we will have a machlokes, heicha deleka elachasa, which is the case of the Mishnah. Then what? My meaning, no one. We know from the Mishnah you eat it twice. The Mishnah says you eat it twice. The question is regarding what bracha do you make when? So Amar Afhunam, that mevarech meikarar amaroir. Marar means the vegetable. You make on the lettuce, boire pri hadama va'achil. And then after the matzah, mevarech alei, on the same type of vegetable, al achilas marer va'achel. Why? Look inside the bottom Tosfos. Mamash takes the place of Rashi many times, because Rav Huna holds, like Reish Lakish, that mitzvah is tzrichos kavana, right? And therefore, when you ate the chazeres or the chasa for karpas, since you did not have in mind mother, you b'chlal did not fulfill the mitzvah. So therefore, you do what we do. We make the alachilas mother when you fulfill the mitzvah, which is when you have the kavanah to fulfill the mitzvah, which is after you eat the matzah. However, daf kuf tezvav, let's just begin the other side. Mastiv la Rab Chizda against Rav Huna. First of all, Rab Chizda argued with him, whether mitzvah tzrichas kavanah or so not. But even if mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, so you, Taka, did not fulfill the mitzvah. It doesn't make sense. He says, La'achar shemilei kreisoy heimenu. After you filled your stomach with the lettuce, you already ate that which theoretically could have been for the mitzvah. Again, even if mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. So doesn't make sense. It's not appropriate. Can you imagine? The mitzvah is eating. So you ate something that is valid for the mitzvah. Technically, you did not do the mitzvah, but you already ate it. But then later you're going to make the bracha. No. So Elam Rab Chizda, no. Guys, karpas, look for an onion, look for a potato. But if you only have an item that is good for mother, then meikara mevarech oleha boire priyadama, and you make then al achilas mother. You don't eat it once because we want for the children to become stimulated. And va'achil eula basoif means after you eat the matzah, then achal achilas chasa, and there you eat it without a bracha, and the latter eating will be dafka to arouse the curiosity of the children. So we're leaving off chevra with the machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Chizda to be continued. Guys, this will be until the end of the Masechta.
Sure.
With more Agadata, but it's now we're going through the Haggadah. We're going to the Seder night.
Thank you.